Welcome to Dark Facade, a channel dedicated to looking past the veneer of humanity and finding its true face. I will be your tour guide down this winding path of tales, ranging from the supernatural, science fiction, and twisted love. All the stories you're about to hear are assorted bits of literature that will range from the bizarre to the unexpected. So sit back, lower the lights, and allow yourself to be taken away from everyday reality to its shadowy reflection. If you enjoy our unusual content, please be sure to hit the like and subscribe button to receive more. Thank you. The Book of Dark Names by Katie Rogers, read by Katie Rogers. Chapter 16. The corridor was a long, dark tunnel which seemed to stretch on forever. Unlike the void he'd been sent to, there was some light provided by the pinprick stars that glittered all around. He watched his four-legged companion drift from one side of the passageway to the other. She was intensely searching for the door that he would need to open. Quiet as a mouse, he watched the lab work like a bomb-sniffing pro. When she hit upon the right scent, she began to paw, scratch, and whine. Christopher ran to her side, talking softly to his golden guide. "What is it, Sarah? What have you found?" he asked, while absent-mindedly stroking her head. To his surprise, he saw a perfectly round door in front of him. It looked almost like something from a Tolkien novel. Sarah's bark became more persistent, causing his hesitation to drain away. After turning the knob, he pushed the door open. To his relief, the hallway became flooded with yellow sunlight. The sound of birds singing and the smell of wild roses filled his senses. What sort of punishment would this be? He stepped across the threshold, letting the door slam behind him. As he ventured further in, he wondered if Sarah had made a mistake. The sound of children's laughter captured his attention. He looked about to see if he could catch a glimpse of them, but saw nothing at first. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw two distinct small shapes run by. He turned to follow them. Sarah tugged at his pant leg, but he shook her loose and left the gravel pathway where they were walking. As he ran past various flower beds, he saw the source of the laughter in full view. Two children scurried playfully around the bend. As Christopher pursued them, he felt as if he had seen them before. But where? The chase came to an abrupt stop in a rose garden, where they were standing on the steps of a white house in front of a big picture window. The pair of them, a boy and a girl, were angelic-looking blondes dressed in their Sunday best. Their blue eyes sparkled with all the mischief of a child's gaze as he slowly approached them. "Hello," he said. "My name is Dr. Christopher Harris." The children laughed in response, but when they laughed this time, there was an almost ghostly sound to it. "What are your names? Do you live here?" he continued. Again the children laughed. As he stood there, he noticed that the scent of the flowers had gotten stronger. Each time the children laughed, the smell of the roses grew. When they laughed again, it had a euphoric effect on him, and the scent of the flowers became intoxicating. He began to stumble like a drunkard until at last he had to sit down in a white decorative chair nearby. There was a rose bush situated behind it, along with a trellis of ivy. He needed to rest for a moment, or at least until his head quit spinning. When he thought he might be able to try again, the perfume of the roses made the world spin once more. Christopher tried to fight against the dizziness, but couldn't win. It was too strong. He attempted to raise his hand to his chin, but couldn't. He looked down to discover that the ivy had entwined itself around him. The delirium he was experiencing must have prevented him from taking notice. He heard a gleeful laughter of the children again, and felt something slither from behind his shoulders. The red petals of the roses grazed his cheeks as they moved past him like serpents. He also noticed that the cheery yellow of the sun had darkened into a blood-red twilight. As the brilliant glow faded away, the world around him changed. The ivy became chains as the roses that had serpentined around his body switched to hideous fly-trap mouths lined with needle teeth. In his delusion, he looked back over at the children and to his horror remembered who they were. They were the boy and girl from the painting. They laughed demonically as the ghoulish foliage began to take bites out of him. Their innocent musings soon turned into sadistic cackles that grew to deafening heights with every howl of pain he made. He began to believe in all the horrible places he denied. Hell was no longer some imaginary horror. It was real, and he was now trapped in it. Every powerful, soul-crushing emotion consumed his spirit like the tiny mouths that devoured his body. The agony was unceasing, and there was no way out. Dear God, this really was hell. In the midst of his torment, a part of his mind managed to splinter off. He could hear barking. Sarah was with him. The image of the golden lab running to Evelyn and demanding her playtime became a bright spot in the hellish dark. The smallest dot of hope began a domino effect. He noticed, when he managed this little scrap of happiness, the pain lessened. No, the mouths lessened. They needed his pain. It's what made them strong. He focused his mind as much as he could on Sarah's barking. Though it was next to impossible, he did it. The negative emotions began to slip away as the memories of his lakeside visit filled his thoughts. Pretty soon all he could hear was his canine guide, and all the pain caused by the nightmarish vines dissipated to nothing. The hideous chortling that had nearly split his mind in half stopped as well. The blood-colored sky returned to its former bright glory, and the garden was at peace again. The children in the house were gone too. Sarah came over and nuzzled his hand as Christopher blinked in the luminous beauty. He was grateful that the pain had stopped. He looked down and smiled at Sarah, who had not given up on getting his attention. Quietly, he knelt down and took her big yellow face in his hands. She panted softly before kissing his. "Thank you, Sarah. You saved me," he grinned, while ruffling her ears affectionately. The canine groaned in approval as she wagged her tail uncontrollably. "Now, girl, can you help me locate my friends? Something tells me they're suffering the same fate, or worse," he deduced ominously. She responded with a loud bark before returning to work dog mode. She spun around and trotted down a paved stone path, with Christopher following close behind. The walkway curved through endless floral landscapes with charming water features. His yellow guide swayed back and forth through trees and shrubs until at last she disappeared into a thicket. Christopher followed her quickly through the dense shrubbery. When she reached the other side, he was taken back by what he saw. The gardens had given way to a tall stone building surrounded by a towering iron fence. As he and Sarah drew closer, Christopher read the name Albright Academy in black metal letters above the front gate. After seeing this, he had a pretty good idea whose nightmare they had just stumbled into. Richard had grown up, a very bright boy in a very poor family. His aunt, however, had married very well and had connections. She managed to secure him a scholarship at a private school where he could excel. His excitement wore down quickly, however, when he encountered his third-grade teacher, Mrs. Edwards. She had a nasty reputation and was called the Witch by all her students. As horrible as she was to the average kid, she was more so to Richard. She despised him. He was a scholarship child, and she hated him for it. He came from nothing, so that made him a freeloader. He had no right to be there, and she could prove it. She had a habit of cracking children over the knuckles with a yardstick for giving wrong answers. Unlike the questions one would ask a normal third grader, Edwards would ask Richard questions well above his grade level. After getting his knuckles whacked more than a few times, he caught on to her game and began studying advanced materials. This only seemed to incite the witch further, so she upped the stakes more. There was one other student in the class on scholarship. Her name was Susie Willows. When Edwards wasn't picking on Richard, Susie was her other favorite target. She took to questioning Richard one day, but had Susie stick her hands out. She began a quick-fire Q&A session with a wicked gleam in her eye. She knew the bright boy had caught on to her unspoken threat. If he missed just one question, Susie would pay. The witch took a new thrill in watching the boy sweat, for she knew eventually the pressure would get to him. Though Richard owed the whole awful experience to his accelerating in academia and uncompromising work ethic, he would always be haunted by Susie's screams whenever he failed. As Christopher walked through the front doors, it dawned on him what sort of dimension this was. The place specialized in nightmares. He believed that this was some sort of dark dream realm, where your greatest fears came alive. One of his greatest fears was being eaten alive. When he was a young boy, his family had went on a ski trip. He had wandered away and gotten lost for a while. As he tried to find his way back, he stumbled across a pack of wolves that had taken down a buck. He watched in horror from the tree line as the hungry animals ripped the carcass apart to devour it. This place must have dug that out of his mind, just as it had plucked this event out of Richard's. Christopher followed Sarah down the hallway until at last he heard raised voices. He stopped just outside a classroom, where he saw a most unbelievable sight. Inside stood the classic Halloween witch, black dress, green skin, and pointy hat. With a raised yardstick in her hand, she towered over a young boy whose face was contorted in fear. Christopher guessed the child was Richard. The truly heartbreaking part of the whole thing was not what the old crone was doing, but what she was saying. "Oh, come on now, Richard. Surely scholar trash like you is bright enough to answer this question," she taunted. "I can't," the boy stammered. "It doesn't make any sense. There's no answer for it." "'Tis, 'tis," she mocked while shaking her head. "I guess your stupidity will cost you dear." With that, she brought the yardstick down hard upon his knuckles, causing a sharp whacking sound. A loud cry erupted from the child, but the old hag grabbed him by the chin between her razor-black nails and ordered him to be silent. "What right do you have to cry, pathetic little wimp? A small tap on your hand and you're wailing. What of your friend Laura's pain? She's out back, buried in a box, dying, because her only hope is you, a stupid little scholar trash who can't even get one question right. That is all you need to do to save her life, and you can't. Laura is going to die, and it's your fault." Christopher could endure no more. He pushed the door open with an angry swipe of his hand. Strangely enough, neither the witch or the child took note of him. When he ordered her to stop, she continued her reign of terror as if he was not there at all. Then it occurred to him, Sarah had been the one to break the spell in the garden, so she'd have to be the one to do it here too. He turned to the dog and began to coax her into doing just that. "Sarah, wake him up. Go on, girl. Wake Richard up," he said. The dog's ears perked forward as she lunged at the witch, knocking her to the ground. When the old crone was out of sight, Christopher saw Richard emerge as an adult for a split second. So this was the key. "Hold her, girl. Hold her down," he ordered, before going over to try and revive his friend. "Richard, wake up. None of this is real. She can't hurt you any more. You're not a child, Richard. You're not at her mercy any longer. Please, you have to wake up." The boy stared into the void where the stranger's voice was coming from. Slowly, as if time was having to catch up, the 8-year-old began to age. Christopher stood and witnessed his friend's evolution from boy to man occur over 30 seconds. The old witch disappeared into thin air as Richard's consciousness became his own again. Christopher? Is that you?" he stammered. "Yeah, Rich, it's me," he smiled. "God, it was all so real," he groaned while raking his fingers through his hair. "I know," he nodded. "It's over now, for you, but we still have to find Laura. The witch mentioned her being buried in a box. Do you know where she is?" "Edwards mentioned her being buried out back, but I don't know where or if it's even true," Richard told him. "It's true, all right. This place has a way of bringing your greatest fears to life," Christopher replied. "I think we are in some sort of dream world where your nightmares play out." "So Laura's greatest fear is being buried alive," Richard deduced. "Yes, it must be," Christopher nodded. The two men quickly exited the classroom, then went out a back door to begin their search. Sarah bolted from in between them and ran to a caretaker's shack towards the back of the property. They followed her to a patch of earth near the fence line. It was obviously disturbed due to the lack of grass on it. Sarah was pawing at the ground and whining. Richard quickly ran over to the workshop and grabbed 2 shovels. They dug furiously for about 30 minutes until one of them hit something hard. Their canine companion began to bark and dig at the soil with determination. They started removing dirt until the smooth wooden top of a coffin emerged. It had been nailed shut, so it took some prying to get it open. Laura was lying unconscious in her wooden prison. Her fingers were raw from bleeding and clawing at the lid. Christopher lifted her out of the hole, then laid her on the grass. Richard felt for a pulse. "She's still alive," he sighed in relief. Without any coaxing, Sarah began to lick her face in an attempt to wake her up. The dog's persistent kisses stirred Laura back into consciousness. She sat up suddenly, gasping for air. She sputtered and coughed so hard she nearly fell back over. Richard caught her against his shoulder where he held her up. "I'm sorry," he murmured softly. Though Laura stared at him in confusion, Christopher knew exactly why his friend had apologized. He looked around and spotted a garden hose hanging on the shack. There was a work table with some mason jars and other tools on top. He went over, rinsed one out, and then filled it with water. "Here, drink this," he said, while handing it to her. Laura gulped it down in record time before taking a deep breath. "How did you guys know where to find me?" she finally asked. "Most of the credit belongs to Sarah here," Christopher confessed while cupping the Labrador's chin. Laura's eyes lit up with recognition as she set her sights on the familiar face. "Sarah? Evelyn Sarah?" she said while reaching out to the canine. The dog smiled with her entire body as she wiggled closer. Laura hugged the gentle beast while raining kisses all over her face. "You knew Sarah?" Christopher asked. "Evelyn talked about her a lot. She showed me some photos she had of her." "I never forget a face," Laura replied before giving the dog one last kiss. "Well, if it had not been for her, I never would have found either of you," Christopher told them. "How did you come across her?" Laura asked. "Evelyn," he answered. "You saw Evelyn?" He nodded. Laura's smile switched from joy to wonder at the thought and possibility Evelyn's presence evoked. Though 1,000 questions were flooding her mind, she knew they would have to wait. There were still members of their crew missing, and they needed to find them. As if she knew this too, Sarah got up from their circle and began to bark. At first the small assembly was amused by her antics. As the sky darkened to the familiar blood red from before, Christopher knew she was warning them to get up and go. "Come on, you two, we need to get out of here now," he said gravely. He received no arguments from his comrades as Richard helped Laura to her feet. They began at a swift walking pace until Christopher heard the distinct howling of wolves. The air grew cold, and the grass gave way to snow. They were suddenly surrounded by a wintry forest, with the sound of a hungry wolf pack behind them. This horrible dimension was not going to give them any reprieve. One way or another, they would experience their nightmares. Sarah led them through the haze of white and evergreens. The cold burned their throats and lungs, but they couldn't stop running. The sound of a vicious growl caused Christopher to look back over his shoulder. A large gray wolf, followed by 5 others, was in hot pursuit. The animals seemed to know how weak their prey was. They also seemed to know that their stamina would run out soon, and a hot meal would be theirs for the taking. As they rounded a bend, Sarah stopped at the mouth of a cave and began to bark. It was the doorway out. All they needed to do was cross it. Christopher found new strength and yelled at his companions to run for the cave. He jumped into the darkness, grateful for its refuge. All at once the harsh landscape and ravenous wolves disappeared as if they never existed. He was standing back in the corridor that Sarah had led him down in the beginning. A few moments passed before he realized his friends had not followed him. A terrible feeling came over him as the dark silence left him to his thoughts. What if they had not heard him? What if the wolves got them? He had to go back. He had to help them. Though every fiber of his being screamed for him to stop, Christopher made himself move onward. Before he could go back, the force of 3 bodies coming through the door pushed him against the wall. Sarah, Laura, and Richard lay panting on the ground at his feet. "What happened? Why did it take you so long to come through?" he asked. "I slipped in the snow. One of the wolves grabbed my ankle, and Richard along with Sarah fought it off," Laura explained breathlessly. "You're injured? Let me see," Christopher ordered while kneeling down. "No, it's okay. The wound is gone. The minute we crossed over, it disappeared," she told him. Relief poured over him as he sunk back against the wall. For the time being, they were all safe. They could take a few moments to catch their breath. Sarah came over to Christopher and placed a paw on his knees while looking into his eyes. "What is it, girl?" he asked while petting her softly. The dog let out a small groan before leaning forward to kiss his face. She then stood up and started making her way back down the tunnel. She turned around one last time before wagging her tail in farewell. He watched her trot away until at last she vanished. Christopher felt a small swell of sadness at her departure, not just because she had been so much help, but because that little trace of Evelyn she brought along went with her. Truth be told, he knew Sarah was only on loan to him. She was going to have to go back eventually. He also knew why she had located Laura first. Above all the others, it was her ability that would serve them best now. They had to find the others, and Laura could do that. "Chris, you ready?" Richard asked, bringing him back to the present. He shifted his attention to his colleagues, who were standing now and anxious to move on. "Yes, I'm ready," he replied.